各位媒体朋友，大家下午好。
Friends of the media, good afternoon. Welcome to the press conference of the State Council Interagency Task Force. At present, the pandemic is still ravaging the world. There are still local cases, with cases cropping up in different provinces frequently. The control situation remains grim. We must unswervingly uphold the general strategy of preventing imported cases or domestic resurgence and the general principle of dynamic COVID-0. We must rigorously implement the 9th version of Prevention Control Protocol and the 9 No's. Implement the accountabilities of local governments, departments, organizations, and individuals. We must act swiftly to curb transmission and minimize the impact of the pandemic on economic and social development. We must fight against arbitrary imposition of restrictions, provide care and affection to the general public who are affected by the pandemic, and ensure their needs for life and medical services are met. We urge the general public to have good personal protection and be active in getting vaccinated. Today we will focus on scientific and precise measures for pandemic control. We have with us DG Lei Zhenglong from the Infectious Disease Prevention Department of the Disease Control Bureau, Mr. Liang Wannian, head of the Pandemic Response Leaders Team of National Health Commission, Mr. Wu Zunyou, Chief Expert of the Epidemiological Study in CDC, and Chief Virologist Mr. Dong Xiaoping from CDC, and they will jointly take your questions. Now the floor is open for questions. Please identify yourself before you ask questions. With CCTV, recently there are cases cropping up in Xinjiang and Inner Mongolia. At the same time, the number of cases are still at a high level in Sichuan and Gansu provinces. What is your assessment of the current pandemic situation? I'd like to invite Mr. Lei Zhenglong to take the question. Thank you for your question. Recently, we are faced with the double risks of imported cases and domestic transmission. In some provinces, there have been the flaring ups of cases. In Xinjiang, the situation can be brought under control. In Inner Mongolia, the case number is tailing off. In Sichuan, Gansu, Shanxi provinces, the situation is gradually brought under control. And in Ningxia and Tibet, the situation is turning around for the better. In other provinces, we still see the multiple cases cropping up. The situation in the country is still grim and complicated, with cases cropping up frequently in multiple provinces. The risk for local cluster cases still exists, but generally the situation is well under control. National Health Commission, National Disease Control Bureau have enhanced the holistic coordination. Around the National Day holiday, we've sent working teams to boost up the prevention control forces in Xinjiang, Inner Mongolia, Ningxia, Yunnan, Shanxi, Tibet. Localities are required to implement the party accountability, seek truth from facts, be pragmatic, objective, and timely in reporting and sharing the pandemic data so that we can fight against the possibility of large-scale resurgence. With people's daily, according to the data released in localities, the feature of virus is rapid transmission, but most of the infected are mild cases or asymptomatic. The general public may have this perception that since the disease are on mild symptoms, why don't we coexist with the virus? Why do we spend painstaking efforts to uphold the dynamic COVID-0? Thank you for your question. I think I should again illustrate the concept of dynamic COVID-0. the Chinese government has been upholding dynamic COVID-0. It is based on the Chinese government's philosophy that we prioritize people's health and life. The principle of a country's pandemic control efforts is based on the philosophy it holds dear to. This is the first thing I want to reiterate. Second, based on our understanding of the nature, the evolution, the potential hazard after evolution of the virus, and based on our scientific understanding of the disease, we are not capable of clearing the virus itself. No one can promise that there won't be any case in any country. Dynamic COVID-0, therefore, is the general principle of our country's pandemic control, the essence of which is to cut off transmission. We never aim to clear off the virus. We never want to put cases entirely extinct in the country. The core of our efforts is to adopt rapid and precise control measures. Whenever we identify a case, we stamp it out, nip it in the bud to prevent the onward transmission or, even worse, scale resurgence. If we can ensure success in dynamic case clearing, there are two keywords. First, swiftness. Swift action, swift identification, swift organization. Second, precise. Precise identification of the cases, precise zoning of the affected areas, precise epidemiological survey, precise identification and management of the close contacts, precisely adopt clinical treatment, and towards the end of the day, we must precisely balance economic and social development and pandemic control. So, on that note, I have re-illustrated the concept and essence of dynamic COVID-0. Second, if we want to assess the hazard of any disease or pandemic, there are different perspectives. There is a generally accepted international perspective of public health. That is the general public's perspective. We can also approach the assessment from the individual perspective. An internationally generally accepted perspective is the general perspective or population perspective. If we use this perspective, we can use the mortality, excessive death rate, and other indicators to make the assessment. It is not the assessment based on individual death rate. For the individual death rate, then the denominator are all those that have been affected, and we will divide the total death by those who are affected, and we will arrive at a death rate. If we look at Omicron variant, the fatality rate, when compared with the coronavirus, the original variant, the fatality has seen some decline. However, because of its strong transmissibility and the large-scale breakthrough cases, that has led to a high incidence rate of Omicron, which means there will be a large percentage of infection among the general population. If the population base is big, then the high infection rate, when multiplied with a big population base, will arrive at a general death rate or a high death rate in the total population. This is also what WHO uses to assess its hazardness. Besides, once the pandemic hit a certain region or a population, we should not only limit our attention to the death, the severe cases, the critical cases. It may even lead to the overstretching of the routine medical services and medical resources, which will lead to unnecessary deaths because of the shortage and overwhelmed health resources. Therefore, if we want to assess the excess rate affected by the fallout of any pandemic, we have the current formula. For example, we look at this year's overall death population and we compare the death numbers with that of the previous years and the year before last year. Without any other explainable factors, it can lead to the conclusion that these excessive death rates was caused by the pandemic. Based on the current situation, Omicron variant in particular has led to a high percentage of excessive death rate. The international literature review has seen a total percentage of 1 out of 100,000.
And thirdly, we have a huge population base and we have a high proportion of the senior, among which we have 267 million senior population, while at the same time we have large amounts of patients with underlying diseases. Those are the population susceptible to the infection of the COVID-19. Once being infected, there is a high possibility for them to get severe diseases or leading to fatality. And from our COVID response efficiencies, we know that through such vaccination, some immunity had been induced. However, we found out that the new variant are having a large scale of evasion of such immunity which have been induced by the immunity. So if we do not adopt such a dynamic COVID-0 policy, once large population are infected, such vulnerable, susceptible population will be subject to the severe diseases and the death, which is endurable from a Chinese perspective. So that is why we need to make our effort as much as possible. And thirdly, scientifically, for the variation of the COVID-19, what is the directions of its future mutations? What are its toxicity and pathogenity? It is very difficult for us to understand. But one consensus has been reached by the science community, that is the virus will keep variating itself and mutating itself. While Omicron is definitely not the last variant of the COVID-19. So under such basic circumstances of uncertainty, maintaining the current COVID-19 response and the dynamic COVID-0 policy have been proved by the last 3 years of the COVID response measures to be efficient, scientific, and effective. So facing such uncertainties, we need to take a certain and steady, fast policy to cope and address such variant. And lastly, we also need to take into consideration of the long-term effect of the COVID-19. The scientists around the globe are worried about the long COVID effect of the infection of COVID-19. There are some researchers that a certain proportion of the infected will feel fatigue, difficult to breathe, cognitive difficulties. Such a long COVID effect has not yet to be known. And what is the length of such long COVID and why there are such long COVID effect is not yet to be known to the science. Unlike the flu or other diseases, scientifically, we have known better of why we have seen such symptoms. So based on such a scenario, I believe that in China, such a general principle of the dynamic COVID-0 is definitely needed. Thank you very much. Now we come to the next question. Thank you very much. I'm from the Financial Center of the CCTV. Previously, in such press conferences, a series of measures have been introduced during the time of the Mid-Autumn Day and the national holiday, and the implementation time was scheduled from the 10th of September until the 31st of October. When the time is approaching the end of it, I want to know whether such control measures will continue. Thank you very much. Indeed, with the increase of the mobility during the Mid-Autumn and the National Day, with a high transmissibility risk of the COVID-19, the State Council has been trying to deploy the ninth protocol measures, and we have enhanced all these control measures so that we would be able to lead the public to have orderly mobility and try to promote the arrival test and try to take more responsive measures of having the NAT test. And after we have made assessment of all these measures, for the next step on the prerequisite of the maintaining of the dynamic COVID-0 as the general principle, we would try to optimize the current COVID-19 measures. Thank you very much. We would like to come to the next question. And the COVID-19 has been spreading for the third year. Many countries have been chosen to be opening its borders. Once all the other countries have opened its borders, will China become the low-lying field of the pandemic and be flooded and eventually be forced to open up itself? Mr. Wu Zunyu, actually, the dynamic COVID-0 is the general principle of controlling acute infectious diseases, and it is also the general principle of the COVID-19 response. For the last 3 years, altogether, there are more than 300 cases and events of the flaring up and rebound of the cases because of the import cases. So it has been proved that the dynamic COVID-0 as a general principle is scientific, and the control effect is really very effective, and it complies with the Chinese reality. So for now, we would have to stay committed to this principle. The pandemic, when spreading from the high prevalence to the low prevalence areas, it is very similar to the water flowing from the high water level to the low level. It is a natural rule of the transmission of the infectious disease. After the control of the Wuhan pandemic, actually, we have seen some spreading that is being caused by the import cases. That is why China has defined the general strategy of the prevention of the case import and the domestic resurgence, and the practice has been proved that our general strategy is scientific and effective. We have already noticed that even there are increase of the cases, that there are increase of cases in some other countries as well. However, many countries have already cancelled and lifted its COVID response measures, and it seems that their life was not severely impacted, and some other countries have even declared the completion of the COVID response measures. So can we just also be taking a resigned approach. Mr. Liang Wannian, from a global perspective, most of the countries' control measures has shifted from the prevention of the infection to the prevention of the severe diseases, fatality, and the overstretching of the health resources. And there are several features. Firstly, many countries have relaxed or even lifted its border control measures. And secondly, some countries have also relaxed or lifted its restrictions on the social endeavors. And thirdly, some other countries are not really taking a mandatory quarantine measures, and there are certain countries trying to take the approach of not identifying the infected through active NAT test or PCR test. However, in general, most of the countries in the world are still trying to intensify the necessary self-protection, for example, wearing the mask and keeping a social distance, while at the same time, the vaccination plus as a principle has been put as a priority, which is the enhancement of the vaccination rolling out. There are several reasons for making such choices. The adjustments of the strategies and the tactics can be reflected in the several following reasons.
First, it's based on the different concept and mindset and philosophy of individual country. Second, it's based on the capacity of response. And third, it is based on its assessment of the rapid Omicron transmission and whether the country has organizational and mobilization capacities in responding to the rapid transmission of Omicron. My personal perception is some of the adjustments by countries might be a helpless choice. If we look at the adjustment made by some countries like the United States and Japan, the adjustment or relaxation of measures may lead to several waves of resurgence and the occurrence of excessive deaths. Our country's general principle of pandemic response is based on our philosophy that we prioritize people's health and life. It is a crystallization of how we prioritize people's health and life. It is also because we are equipped with the conditions and capacities of dynamic COVID-0. In general, on our territory, it can be said as clean. If we can safeguard the entry, even if with the imported cases, we can still rapidly clear the transmission and cut off the transmission. 3 years of practices have proven that we can rapidly cut off any transmission triggered by the imported cases. It's because the government has the strong capacity of mobilization, and we have an innate collectivism among the Chinese populace. We have the advanced information technology. We have the treatment capacity, prevention control capacity, the capacity of mobilizing and providing supplies. And these have been tested and proven by the past practices. And these we consider as specific features and advantages of our country. That's why we can uphold the general principle of prioritizing people's life and health, and we can balance economic social development with pandemic control. If we, like other countries have done, resign ourselves, we will definitely see a large number of population infected, among which there will be a big number of severe cases and a big number of deaths. Those are not only numbers, those go contradictory with our philosophy and our culture. With the paper, we know the virus keeps evolving. Is the 9th version of prevention control protocol still valid? I'd like to invite Mr. Dong Xiaoping to take the question. Thank you for your question. The evolution of virus is a natural phenomenon, yet we do not see evidence or pressure of changing or revising the prevention control protocol because of the new variant that has evolved. The 9th version of prevention control protocol has important information on the key links of the pandemic prevention control, including public measures, education of the public, vaccination, patriotic health campaign, pandemic monitoring, pandemic response, lab testing, imported case prevention control, and the key links and key steps of prevention control. There are detailed scientific and highly feasible provisions. Months of practices have shown that the technical measures in the 9th version have been proven effective in responding to the pandemic triggered by Omicron without the occurrence of a major new variant, without major change of pathogenicity because of the variant, without the substantial decline of the existing vaccine protection. The existing 9th version of prevention control protocol can still meet the needs of pandemic control. Thank you. With Dragon TV, as we uphold the general principle of dynamic COVID-0, how can we ensure that the work and production resumption can be accelerated and we can minimize the impact on the general populace? How can we ensure efficiency and the humanistic touch in our measures? Mr. Lei Zhenlong will take the question first. We have been constantly improving scientific and prevention control measures. That's also what we require localities. We should never over-streamline the management, and we shouldn't replace specific and zoned management with the overall static city management. We require localities to have precise zoning of the high and medium risk regions and adopt resolute and flexible and zoned measures. And for those who meet the conditions to be lifted out of the lockdown, should be immediately lifted lockdown. We must prevent the over-streamlined measures of putting the entire city under lockdown. Second, we minimize the impact of the pandemic on the general public. Apart from the scientific and precise measures, we have ensured all the measures are affectionate. We ensure the life, the supply, and the medical needs of the public are met. We have made holistic coordination among the property owner committee, the neighborhood committee, and volunteers to ensure guaranteed services and affectionate care are provided to the affected populace. Third, we have improved our guidance to localities. We guide localities to comprehensively implement the policy measures of the 9th version of the control protocol. We've improved the training on the local staff. We've improved the management over the key places, people at risk, in particular the cargo drivers and those who work in the public transportation industry, to prevent over-streamlined one-size-fits-all or arbitrary imposition of restrictions. With Hong Kong Economic Herald, many cities are promoting regular NAT testing with a view to ensure early detection, early prevention, and to minimize the impact on the life of the general populace. But we've noticed that despite the regular NAT testing adopted in some regions, once there is cluster cases, still there is the whole city put on a lockdown. How should we assess the situation?
Prevention of the COVID-19 relies on 4 earlies. One of the core of 4 earlies is the early detection, and NAT is the golden standard of trying to diagnose whether a patient had been infected. And the domestic and the international experiences had already been proved that the sensitivity and specificity has been very high, so that is why it has always been regarded, as I said, as the golden standard. From the last 3 years of the experiences and the capacity building for the last 3 years of the COVID response, China has equipped itself with a very powerful NAT test. So each and every day we have the capacity of having a test of 100 million, which means if it is a 10 mixed test, then it means that every day we have a capacity of testing over 1 billion population each day. And also for the large cities, we have built up the 15 minutes of the NAT test circle, which make the NAT test truly accessible. And experience have been proved that in some early detection of the domestic resurgence, it is highly effective, and many of the infections were actually detected through such a routine NAT test. Well, as you have mentioned above, the whole area static city management as an issue, I want to make an addition that the control objective, one of which is trying to achieve the ultimate and the maximum effects with the minimum cost. That is, our objective is try to avoid such a whole area static management as much as possible. So such a measure shouldn't be regarded as a measure that has been taken very easily. So we need to ensure 4 earlies and also the 4 parties' responsibilities so as to make sure that our control measures can be as early and as small and targeted, as concrete and accurate as possible. Of course, because of the features of the Omicron variant, that it is truly very difficult for us to detect such a transmission lines if there is an occurrence of the pandemic, especially if the pandemic was detected at a later stage, especially when the transmission chains and lines are not very clear, and it is very difficult to identify the transmissibility lines. So that is why we need to make a judgment on the comprehensive risks, on the prerequisite of such certain measures should be taken. I believe in some certain regions, the static management in some certain areas is one of the measures to control the pandemic, and we should try to avoid a whole area static management. But under some circumstances, some level of the static management can be adopted, but such a very accurate judgment and early detection, early stamping out of the diseases and the cases might be a must. So the next question, I'm from Phoenix TV. Some countries have been forced to take a resigned approach. So from the number of the cases and the number of the fatalities, can you give us an illustration? And also, can you please give us an introduction of the comparisons of the infection rate as well as the fatality rate of China with that of the other countries across the globe? I would like to give the floor to Mr. Wu Zunyu. And thank you for your question. Of the prevalence of the COVID-19 for nearly 3 years, everyone around the globe have been somewhat influenced by the COVID, and from the prevalence and the fatalities, in a comparative speech, the Chinese person are the least influenced by the COVID-19. Let's make a comparison, first of all, to the United States and then to the global figure. 3 days ago, that is the 10th of October, WHO had been released that there are reported cases in America amounting to 95,260,865 with a death of 1,050,195 cases. And for the Chinese confirmed cases, 254 and 66. And symptom infections 755 and 48, and with a total infection of 1,900,114 with a death of 5,226. And if we make a calculation of a measurement of every 100,000 population, for each 100,000 we have an infection rate of 70, which is only 1 in 483 compared with that of America. And if we also calculate the fatality rate of COVID-19 in Chinese domestic and such figures stood at 0.4 of every 100,000, which is 1 in 785 compared with that of the United States. If we make a horizontal comparison with that of the globe, Chinese population accounts for 18.32% of the global population. The prevalence accounts for only 0.16% of the global population. If we make a prevalence based on the calculation of 1 million, then our prevalence is only 1 in 112 compared with the global figure, and the fatality accounts for only 0.08%. And also for the calculation of the fatality of every 1 million population, the fatality rate only accounts for 1 in 229 with the global figure. So no matter what we make in comparison with the US or the global figure, China is really having a exceptional, excellent performance. There is no reason for us not to be confident. There is no reason to doubt our own control strategies. So now let's come to the next question. From China Youth newspaper, we have detected the Omicron variant, BF7 subvariant, domestically for the very first time. Can you please give us introduction of the changes of the pathogenicity and the transmissibility compared with the previous variant? Actually, this question was asked every time there is a new subvariant or variant. Once I would like to stress that such a variant of the virus is a very natural phenomenon, which means that virus is a very small microorganism is really making reactions to the external pressure. For example, for the COVID-19 virus, we have large amount of the natural infectious population as well as the population with the vaccination being vaccinated. So that is why we have seen accelerated speed of variations of the COVID-19, especially from the beginning of this year, which is 2022, which is now talking about the BF subvariant Omicron. Actually, it is BA5217 as an abbreviation, since it is really a very complex one. So that is why we have combined it as BF. So in essence, it is a derivative sub-branch of the BA subvariant, and this BF7 has been detected since the beginning of September, and it has become a very frequently seen variant and taking some proportion of all the variants, starting from the second half of September. The proportion is only 3.5%, and it's increased to 11% last week.
Third, when compared with other sublineage, such as BA.2, BA.5, very similar. BF.7 sublineage has shown very strong transmissibility. But we still need further observation to conclude whether BF.7 will become the next prevalent variant in the world. And fourth, in terms of pathogenicity, BF.7 has not shown major change. With the cover, it is said that in some regions there are some arbitrary imposition of control measures, such as the forceful mass quarantine or entry refusal. What will be the measures adopted to prevent this arbitrary addition or imposition of measures? Mr. Lei Zhenglong is taking the question. For the situation you have mentioned, we have received such complaints from the general public on our website, because we opened the bulletin for the general public to give us feedback for any violation of the 9 no's. Between the 1st and 12th of October, among the feedbacks and complaints we've received on that bulletin board, the top 3 complaints include the entry refusal or forced mass quarantine, 36.3% of the total complaints. And next to it, the arbitrary expansion of mobility restriction from medium high-risk regions to other regions. 26.61% of the complaints are related to this, and thirdly, 17% of the complaints are related with the arbitrary expansion of people at risk who must be controlled. National Health Commission, National Disease Control Bureau pay high attention to these complaints. We have set up ad hoc working committees and workshops to deal with this over-streamlined, one-size-fits-all arbitrary imposition of restrictions. The ad hoc working team have timely monitored the localities to verify these complaints and follow closely with the revision of the measures. We must maximize our efforts to ensure prevention control. We must also maximize our utmost efforts to serve the general public to deal with their headaches. We have leveraged the role of this ad hoc committee to deal with the arbitrary introduction of the restriction measures. We give exposure to this situation. We follow up closely with the issues to see to it that they are properly dealt with. With daily economics, this year, sporadic cases have brought impact on socio-economic performance. How should we assess the impact? How should we calculate the cost effectiveness of prevention control? Mr. Liang Wannian is taking the question. Thank you for your question. Countries around the world are definitely impacted by the pandemic. It is certainly that the pandemic exerts its fallout on economic social development on all countries, with no exception. The prevention control measures have the very purpose of avoiding or minimizing the impact of the pandemic on economic social development. However, the COVID-19 pandemic has lasted for almost 3 years. In the history of a large-scale pandemic of the mankind, this is rarely seen. The evolution of the virus, the more rapid transmission of the virus, and other reasons have led to the necessity of the change of prevention control measures. And this will undoubtedly have its fallout on economic social development. China has been upholding its general principle of dynamic COVID-0 and general strategy of preventing imported cases or domestic resurgence. We have been emphasizing scientific, law-based, and precise prevention control with the very purpose that these measures can ensure the minimal impact of the pandemic on economic social development. Practices have shown that China's prevention control measures have been successful, effective, and the most cost-effective, either in terms of the prevention control efficacy or in the minimal economic social impact. We are leading in the world in effective prevention control, and we have balanced it with economic social development. When we assess the effectiveness of prevention control measures, there are different perspectives and different metrics. If we want to calculate the cost effectiveness, then we should consider the hypothesis of what cost is, what effect is. If we want to calculate the effect, we should also have a dynamic perspective to look at the overall effectiveness, the general cost. When we have this calculation, we should not only limit our attention to the economic gains. In this general budget book, there are entries on which we should note down the livelihood, the social, economic performance, the dynamic entries. Given the fact that this is a large-scale pandemic impacting the general populace, we should have multiple entries in this general budget book. In the short time, sometimes we have to sacrifice the interest of a handful of people in certain localities in exchange of the longer-term benefits of a bigger population on a larger scale. And when these are all factored into the general budget book, this is the most cost-effective. I believe all countries have this general budget book to keep and different entries to consider. In this context, how to assess the entries and make the calculation on the general budget book. It is again based on the different philosophies of different countries' governance. With CNS, sporadic cases in some regions keep cropping up, and some provinces and cities are dealing with the recurrence of Omicron-triggered pandemic. And there is cumbersome efforts made at the community level? Are there any changes to the community control focus and methodologies? Mr. Liang Wannian is again taking the question. Thank you for your question. In some localities, we see a longer duration of the pandemic, and this is caused by multiple reasons. The rapid transmission and the stealth transmission of the Omicron is one reason. It is an objective reason, and we shouldn't exclude possible other regions. For example, some localities haven't made up their mind to have sufficient preparation for the pandemic, and they have let down their guards or have taken chances. Therefore, we must rigorously implement the 9th version of the prevention control protocol.
And the implementation of the 9th version of the control protocol is of prime importance. And the grassroots COVID-19 response is the first line of the defense, and it undertakes multiple control tasks, while at the same time it also undertakes the task of maintaining a normal production life. So it has been taken an irreplaceable role. While in the COVID-19 response battle, our country has formed such a very systematic mechanism, and we have accumulated the coordination mechanism in the grassroots level. But undeniably, in the grassroots level, there are still some weak links in the COVID-19 response, and we have seen the loopholes and the weakest links in the grassroots level. So for the next step, we should keep the capacity building of the enhancing of the grassroots level COVID-19 response as the priority among all the priorities, while at the same time we should enhance the awareness, education, the policy interpretation, and the preparation of the COVID-19 response materials so that we would be able to do a better job in the COVID-19 response. Now we would like to come to the next question. From Southern Metropolitan, it has been mentioned that there is a possibility that there is occurrence of the long COVID after being infected. So can you please give us some introduction of the latest research of the long COVID? We'd like to give the floor to Mr. Wu Zunyu. Thank you for your question. The so-called long COVID, it has been called as the long-term symptoms of the COVID, and as early as October of 2021, a clinical definition by the WTO has been given, which means that after being infected of COVID for within 3 months, there is some new recurring symptoms after being infected of COVID in an acute manner, or such symptoms had been continuing existence after being infected, and such symptoms have been lasted for at least 2 months, and it can reoccur for many times, and it cannot be explained by any other types of symptoms. And according to the global research results, it covers a wide range of health problems, for example, fatigue, thinking difficulties, difficulty to concentrate, difficulty to breathe, nausea, headache, fast heartbeat, chest pain, cough, joint and muscle pain, depression, anxiety, fever, the loss of smell, and the loss of taste, and etc. Such symptoms can last for several weeks, several months, or even a longer duration. The long COVID are more frequently seen among the severe cases, but it can also be seen in the light cases. And generally speaking, if the infected had been vaccinated, there is a much lower risk to be subject to the long COVID. And the prevention of the long COVID, the best measure is for the prevention of being infected. So that is why China has defined its general strategy of the prevention of case import and domestic resurgence and the general principle of the dynamic COVID zero. It is not only our general principle and strategy, it is also the best way of prevention of long COVID. Next question. So from Red Star, recently our CDC has given us the latest figure of the vaccination. Can you please give us the latest figure of the vaccination rollout, especially of the vaccination among the senior over 60 years old and also above the vaccination of the boosters? We would like to give the floor to Mr. Lei Zhenglong. Until the 12th of August this year, we have altogether 3,437,851 doses of vaccination, covering a population of 1,334,300,000, and among which 1,271,711,000 have been fully vaccinated, accounting for 92.45% and 90.2% respectively, and 878,320,000 have been booster vaccinated, and we have 239,216,000 being vaccinated among the population of 60 years old, and among which 227,865,000 have been fully vaccinated, accounting to 90.6% and 86.3% respectively, and 177,568,000 have been booster vaccinated. And we have already entered into a season with a high possibility of the prevalence of a flu, and with the COVID-19 keep varying itself, how can we make a better preparation of the possible overlapping of these respiratory diseases? Thank you for your question, Mr. Lei Zhenglong. Since some provinces has already entered into a peak season of flu prevalence, and such occurrences and prevalences is even much higher than that of the prevalence rate of the COVID-19. And this September, we have diligently summarized the COVID-19 response experiences. We have made the deployment of the prevention of the flu based on making preparations in advance. And first of all, we need to enhance the surveillance work of the flu. The sentinel hospitals and the laboratories can play its full roles to enhance its report of the cases, so that we would be able to detect the variations of the antibodies and etc. to provide the scientific evidence for scientific and the targeted prevention. Secondly, we need to do a better job in the vaccination rolling out of the flu, so that for the medical workers, senior children, and chronic disease patients are the priority population to be vaccinated. And thirdly, we need to enhance our awareness education together with the relevant government agencies. We need to do a better job in the awareness education, so that the protection conscience of the population should be further enhanced, to wear masks and to pay great attention to the hand sanitation, so that we would be make better preparations of the possible overlapping of COVID-19 and the flu. And we would like to ask, facing such new variant of the Omicron, how can the public do a better protection, and are there any suggestions from the experts? We would like to give the floor to Mr. Dong Xiaoping. I believe it can be illustrated from the following two aspects. The first one is about the prevention of the specificity, which is about the vaccination, especially among the high-risk population. The booster vaccination is of great significance. The vaccination of COVID-19 for the prevention of the hospitalization, severe diseases, and fatal diseases and death, its protection has been fully proved, even though actually we would have to know that when Omicron has been ravaging, that the pathogenicity is still different with when other variants were prevalent and ravaging across the world. I believe that this should be attributed to our enhanced vaccination rolling out. And secondly, we need to do a better job in the non-medical measures, which is the personal hygiene, personal protection measures. Actually, it is applicable for the prevention of any types of respiratory diseases, especially for the senior and the population with underlying diseases. These two measures should be effectively done.
边这位穿白色衣服的记者。
Last question, please. With Hong Kong China News Review. All of us aspire that the pandemic can be ended at an early date and we can return to normal life and work. How long will it take? What are the preparations we should make? Mr. Liang Wannian is taking the question. Thank you for your question. Your aspiration is all of ours aspiration. All of us hope that the pandemic can be ended early and life can go back to 2019. All our efforts are aimed at an early ending of the pandemic. In general, it's fair to say that we see the light at the end of the tunnel, but we haven't arrived at the end of the tunnel yet. We need to continue with our efforts and continue with the good control efforts. As to the comprehensive assessment or declaration of a final victory, it depends on the evolution of the virus, the infection spectrum, the situation of the severity, and the resilience of the entire health system, the prevention control capacity, the treatment capacity, the public health interventions, and all these should come into a good balance. We are in the window of opportunity, and there are several efforts that we should keep up with. First, we should firm up our confidence and unite our thoughts, uphold our general strategy and general principle. We should seize this precious window opportunity, and we must persist with our efforts. We must carry on, and confidence is more precious than gold. Second, as Professor Dong Xiaoping has rightly pointed out, we must strengthen vaccination, in particular vaccination for the elderly, so as to prevent severe critical cases or even death. Third, we should continue to strengthen prevention, control, and treatment capacity and preparation, in particular the strong capacity in preventing overwhelmed health resources in hospitals, and we must be fully prepared that even if there is large-scale outbreak, we can ensure routine health services can not be overstressed. And fourth, ensure easier and more convenient research, development, distribution, supply of pharmaceuticals, therapeutics, and vaccines. In the world, we have seen glimpses of hope for the larger scale accessibility of pharmaceuticals and vaccines. And fifth, we must also be prepared in our supplies for pandemic response, and also supplies for ensuring the normal life and work. And finally, we must be swift enough, precise enough, prevent against the one-size-fits-all approach, prevent arbitrary imposition of restrictive measures. If all these can be ensured and implemented, if we firm up our confidence, we will be there at the end of the tunnel. Thank you. On today's press conference, experts have taken questions on precise and scientific control of the pandemic. We'll continue to hold press conferences in the future. We look for. Please stay tuned. Thank you. This is the end of today's press conference.